I'd like to welcome everyone to the fourth Department of Energy Cyber Distinguished Speaker Series. Two quick updates up first. In addition to the folks we have here in the auditorium, the vast majority of participants and viewers are going to be on energy.gov's website through Ustream. And that includes the interagency, and I'd also like to thank the Federal CIO Council for coordinating with the rest of the interagency in inviting people to join in today. Also like to ask those folks that are here in the auditorium to please silence your cell phones so we don't interrupt the event. As I mentioned, I'd like to thank you for joining the fourth DOE Cyber Distinguished Speaker Series. We structured this monthly series to both provide an opportunity for DOE broadly, including the broad DOE enterprise, to interact with top talent in the cyber field, but also to learn about best practices, network with other top cyber professionals, and gain traction on today's complex cyber issues. Since the inception last September, we've hosted over 750 attendees to these speaking events and got very good feedback, which we appreciate, so thank you. To include, as I mentioned, DOE enterprise and interagency participation. It's with great pleasure that the Department of Energy welcomes its first panel. The five-person panel that you'll be hearing from today are digital service experts. Really, these are rock stars in what we're doing as a federal government and broadly in digital services. And not only we, but the broader interagency can learn a lot about what they've accomplished. These experts deliver digital information and services across a variety of platforms, devices, and delivery mechanisms every day. And as you all know, digital services affect all of us, how not only we deliver our missions, but how we interact with the public and deliver product and services to the U.S. people. The real question and challenge lies, of course, in what data will improve service outcomes, in particular seeking better ways to meet customers' needs without compromising privacy rights and informational security. So the panelists will discuss different elements and facets of digital services, as well as the game-changing cloud.gov product offering. So I'd like to personally thank all of our panelists who have joined us today. That includes Gabriel Ramirez, the backend developer for OpenFOIA at GSA's 18F, Allison Rolling, the lead backend engineer at the Department of Commerce, Ala Seifert, the digital strategist from GSA's 18F, Marissa Newhall, DOE's own director of digital strategy and communications, and Moza Dexia, the DevOps infrastructure engineer from GSA's 18F. I'd also like to then introduce DOE's Principal Deputy CIO for Enterprise Information Resources Management, Mr. Robbie Green, who will be moderating this panel for us. With that, I'll turn it over to Robbie.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. I'd like to cover a few objectives for today's digital services panel. Just a refresher, some objectives are to meet and learn from the established leaders in the cyber community, share innovative ideas, enhance outreach and strengthen awareness, share insights on our current cyber issues and strategies, reflect on the values and share best practices throughout our extended cyber community, and provide a venue for DOE's workforce to learn and ask questions. And as a reminder, I'll do a little further introduction of all the panelists. They'll go through a short presentation, and then at the end we'll accept questions. We'll accept questions from the audience, and we also have questions coming in live. So please join me and welcome our panelists. Without further ado, I'd like to start on my left here with Mr. Gabriel Ramirez. And just a short bio of Gabriel. His work consists of building new features for OpenFOIA, and in his day-to-day work, he implements contact forms and full-text searching, as well as scraping, cleaning, and validating data. He's also a developer and an architect for the Open Controls and Compliance Masonry Project, an effort to accelerate the ATO process by treating compliance documentation as code. Going down the line, Miss Allison Rolling. Allison's background is in government data, both from inside government and outside the government. And it helps her to push towards using human-centered design and lean methodologies. Allison's developed FB Open, which is an API and search index to aggregate federal business opportunities. And last spring, she developed the Federal Election Commission's first API. Next, Ms. Ala Seifert. Ala is an acquisition subject matter expert who describes herself as an all-around tech lady. Her passion lies at the cross-section of where technology and public service both meet, and she's also a Russian linguist. Our own Miss Marissa Newhall. Marissa is the manager of the Department of Energy's public-facing website, energy.gov, as well as all of the digital content for the site. She also oversees Energy's Digital Reform Project, which is an effort to cut wasteful spending by consolidating the agency's disparate websites onto a centralized open source platform. Ms. Newhall also serves as the senior advisor to our Secretary Moniz for all things strategic initiatives in digital communications within the department. Under her watch, the Energy Department's social media following has nearly doubled. And Marissa was also instrumental in helping DOE become the first to successfully sponsor a cloud hosting provider for FedRAMP certification. Mr. Moza Dexia, to her left. Mr. Zia considers himself a generalist and enjoys learning about new trends, getting his hands on the next big thing before it's a big thing and finding the best fit for it. He also delivers clean, maintainable, secure solutions so that people who are going to be using that unique technology, no matter who they are or how they do it, they have confidence and assurance that the tech they're using is both secure and safe. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panels and for their presentations before we take questions from the group. Mr. Ramirez.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting all of us to speak today on some of our work. So when I was in college, the Roots actually came to visit. So that's the band pretty much. And being the inquisitive student that I was, I actually got to went out and read the contract, that kind of that agreement for them to come. I was first of all curious how much did it cost and stuff. But while I was reading the contract, I actually found a small clause that said on the table there will be 100 eucalyptus flavored toothpicks, and it just totally puzzled me. I just didn't understand why that was important to the band's performance. So I kind of just let it go and just didn't understand it until I came to the government and actually got involved with compliance. So I'll explain how it all ties in a little later, but what I want to talk about is essentially what is compliance, a high-level overview, and how it affects digital services, the differences between compliance and security, and finally, what 18F is doing to make the whole compliance and security process move a little faster. So going back to the Roots and the 100 toothpicks, what I found out is that when the band manager comes into the place that they're going to play, they look for the 100 toothpicks to see if the person that actually set up the stage actually read the contract. Because if they didn't read the contract, then they wouldn't put the 100 toothpicks, and that's an indicator that basically the stage isn't safe or something could go horribly wrong. So in the same way, there are a lot of things that developers think don't really matter for compliance, such as documenting these pieces, making sure that you put the correct warning signs all over your code, and also public facing sites, etc. But the real reason that we have these things here is to make sure that you read the rest of this stuff, right? Because if you don't read and you don't implement all the pen testing, all the security measures, then there's probably an indicator that your site is vulnerable to attack. So that's how it kind of all ties in, and I finally understood why the Roots actually put that clause in. So I guess one of the issues with compliance in government, I think there are two main things, right? First of all, it's actually really confusing to developers. So I started out as a software engineer, as a developer at 18F, and the first thing that my first introduction to compliance was hearing all this jargon, right? It's the NIST 853, NIST 800 whatever, AC2, AC5, and the people who work on compliance really understand the code, but as developers we have no idea what it means. So it's really difficult for us to implement and make it, we know how to make our system secure, we just don't know how to make it compliant. And because of this kind of back and forth, what ends up happening is that everything slows down because developers will go and like they do what they're interested in, right? Like building code, making sure that things go out, things are built like in a fast and agile way. And then the compliance people say like, wait, you can't do that. That's not compliant. Like, let's stop it. So this kind of clash really slows everything down. And sometimes that not only slows down the production of new sites, but at the same time, it can actually like lead to more security flaws. Essentially, like if you have a system that you need to upgrade and you can't upgrade it because like there's the compliance is in the way, then you're not going to upgrade your system, and then your system's not secure. So it's kind of like this weird catch-22 where the system that the documentation system that was built to protect you from attack is actually maybe the one that might actually cause you to be attacked. So this kind of starts to highlight the differences between compliance and security, right? Compliance is a documentation framework. It's a way, essentially, that the government codifies security, and it's a way that like anyone can come and read this code and read how it's been implemented and understand and kind of assure and have the trust that this system is secure. Security, on the other hand, I think is a lot more raw than that. It's actually preventing your system from being attacked. So because of this, you can actually have systems that are completely compliant, but at the same time still get attacked. And I think we've seen this in government a lot, right? That where we have a system that if you went out and like found the SSP, it'd be completely filled out. It'd be 100% correct, but it still got attacked, and like we still got all this data leaked. And I think that happens. I mean, at least in part because the compliance framework isn't really like meeting the needs of the true security framework. And I don't think that's a problem with the framework itself. It's just a way that it's being implemented. So at 18F, we kind of ran into this problem right at the beginning, and I don't think we've 100% solved it, but we're making strides to actually solving it. So we've done a couple of things. First, I think that the most important thing is that we've actually taken our security people and we're starting to actually have our security people and our developers talk at the beginning of a project. So developers understand, and essentially the security people, your ISOs and everyone, is actually translating what the compliance measures mean for developers so we can actually implement it on the front, instead of having essentially a system that gets completely built out and then at the end of it we have to do the compliance and security measures. If you do it that way, it's just kind of backwards. So we're doing it like we're moving through the process. We're trying to move through the process concurrently. The second thing that we're doing is that we're actually building out toolkits for pen testing and vulnerability scanning that developers can actually use. Because if there's and what we found out is that sometimes there'll be a backlog on the people who do this. So if developers can go ahead and run these scans right away while they're building their product, they won't run into like a million issues at the end. So this is like a way of moving essentially compliance to a more agile framework. The third thing that we're doing is we're actually developing a new way of documenting compliance. And the other way we're doing that is essentially treating compliance as code. So right now, if you go onto like compliance.cloud.gov, you'll see essentially an SSP, and that SSP is actually generated not from like a Word document like traditionally has been done. It's actually generated from a series of YAML/JSON files that are composed in a special way so developers can understand it and security people can understand it and actually update automatically. So what we're doing is, and I can go more into this about later because it's like I've been working on this for the past like 7 or 8 months, and it's a very detailed process. But the important thing is that we treat compliance as code, so it's actually extensible. It's actually, you can import it. There are dependencies, and it's a really cool system. I think that is really going to speed up the compliance process. And finally, is that we're actually building the cloud.gov platform to be compliant with FedRAMP and NIST. So essentially we're doing that by doing all the things that we mentioned above, but the idea is that essentially if we provide like a shared platform that has already built into it like FedRAMP compliance, what the applications that are built on top of it will get to do is essentially inherit a lot of the controls that we've already taken care of, allowing applications to only deal with the subset that they actually need to deal with. So this will solve, like we're hoping that this will solve the speed of compliance and help compliance move at the speed of essentially delivery.
Thank you. Next we have Miss Allison Rolling.
Thank you. It's great to hear from Gabriel the sorts of things that are going on around compliance. I was a member of 18F until recently when I joined the Commerce Data Service, and so we are kind of going through all of this stuff again. But what I'd like to talk about a little bit more is kind of the history of the digital services as they've evolved, some of the more cultural aspects, lessons learned from those, and finally I'll touch on some developer experience with cloud.gov. So I got interested in government work through the nonprofit world. I was initially a developer at the Sunlight Foundation. And it just, the government has really interesting data sets to work with. And I spent 3 years trying to kind of improve government services from the outside, taking open data and building more usable interfaces on it than the government itself was able to provide. So when I got the chance to and got invited to be a Presidential Innovation Fellow and start changing things from the inside, I kind of jumped at the chance. And so what we found out during the Presidential Innovation Fellowship, I was part of the second round of that fellowship in 2013. It was a 6-month fellowship, and the problems with government IT were way too big to solve in 6 months. What we did learn was that there was really great power in even just building a simple prototype. People in government I just watched as they were completely blown away because they'd never been able to work alongside a developer before to elucidate ideas that they had. And then to realize that something could be built to address a need in mere weeks or days. And it was a completely foreign and surprising thing to some folks that we met. And I just consistently kept meeting people within government who just had great ideas, but didn't feel like they were empowered to do anything about them. Whether it was that they didn't have tools or they didn't have cover from management or just the education or the tech know-how. So it became clear to the innovation fellows that we needed to do something more permanent, to stick around and really help bring about a cultural change within the government. So towards the end of the 6-month fellowship, there had been ideas around for a long time to make the fellowships more permanent. The idea of perma-PIFs, they called them. And so right off the end of our fellowship, we managed to get the administration on board, and people at the White House were really interested in this. And so about a dozen of our fellows rolled right off of our fellowships and onto this thing that would eventually one day be called 18F. It wasn't called that at first. There were some other names we batted about, but the lawyers didn't let us use any of them. So eventually we kind of settled on this just made-up name that referenced the address of GSA headquarters where we were located at 18th and F Streets. So at that point, we were able to bring about a little bit more long-term culture change. And one of the most important lessons that I got out of this was that it's really important to have strong management figures who can come in and say, look, I'm going to create a safe space for you people to innovate. Go ahead, maybe break some rules and just kind of do your thing, right? And that was so important to have leaders who could kind of push back and make that space for us where we could just focus on doing our work. Whether that can come down to really mundane things, even to the point of having dedicated sort of liaisons with HR departments and benefits departments, just so that people aren't being dragged down by the sort of the slowness or lack of responsiveness in the rest of the bureaucracy. Yeah, and that kind of brings me to the idea of how do you recruit good people into government to do this sort of work. I think in a lot of ways the government benefits and the kind of flexible workplaces, especially GSA had really great policies in place already around being able to telework. I know for myself going into government, it actually turned out to be one of the most flexible work environments that I'd been in. And so I think that making those safe spaces and kind of selling the benefits of working within the government in terms of, you know, being able to telework, and having the whole government benefits package, and as well as the ability to work on just absolutely huge problems, really gets us a long way toward recruiting the sort of folks that we need to do this work. So finally, real quickly, I'd like to touch on the cloud.gov platform, which Gabriel alluded to. At 18F, I was one of the sort of people who piloted using the cloud.gov platform. The FEC API that we developed last spring was released on the cloud.gov platform, and early on in the days of 18F, we were doing a lot of our own DevOps work and developers just setting up servers and doing all sorts of things, kind of glue to keep our systems running that just took away from the work and the ability to actually deliver products. So what 18F has put together with the cloud.gov platform is just awesome because it creates reusable deployment environments, so developers just don't have to think about that. And I know I'm about out of time, but I just wanted to mention now I'm at the Commerce Data Service, kind of doing the same startup in government thing over again. And it just reinforces the fact that this is really more about cultural change than anything else, getting people on board with kind of understanding a new way of working, that we use agile and lean methods, and that we can help get them closer to customers, and actually sort of finding out who their audience for the products are, and working in an iterative manner means that they can just do things in a much different and more targeted way than when you're kind of throwing a project over the wall to a contractor who's going to spend 2 years working on something and then bring it back to you. And with that, I think I'm out of time. Okay.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Ala Seifert.
Good afternoon, everyone. Speaking of tackling large problems, let's talk about procurement. So 18F, as my colleagues have described, our mission is to transform how the U.S. government buys, builds, and shares digital services. The word buys is in there, and it is crucial. My background is I'm a trained attorney, but I came from a vendor background. I think a number of you in the audience are also potentially vendors to the government. And so we at 18F, we're only 165, 170 people. We get the ground. We try and work on culture change for our clients, but ultimately the way scale comes into the government is often through acquisition. And so the acquisition group is trying to help government buy better technology and make more effective procurement decisions. By way of background, 18F, we're a cost recoverable organization. We exist. We are not congressionally authorized with a budget line item. We have a revenue pool because we are headquartered at the GSA, but ultimately we have to go out, get business from different federal government clients, and then be reimbursed for our services. This model is actually really interesting because it means that clients have skin in the game. our clients, partners, what have you. And part of the way that we are able to scale our services is through procurement. And so I'm in the acquisition services group at 18F, and we sort of do two things. We help with the logistics of the buying, and then we do a lot of consulting around the buying. As I don't know if there are any contracting officers or anyone who works with COs in the room, but the acquisition process is lengthy, and you want to make sure you're buying the right thing. And a lot of what we do is consulting around that. So in the bucket of consulting, we do discovery sprints. Speaking of working in an agile and lean way, we do a short engagement with a partner agency where we sort of speak to stakeholders, understand what the problem set is, and then we make some recommendations about what to buy. We also ghostwrite RFPs. That means coming in, speaking with the stakeholders, but ultimately the agency for a flat fee will receive a contract that they can then go throw up on Fed Biz Ops or direct award to a vendor depending on the legal qualifications of the contract. And then we also do product management for internal and external products. In addition to that, we have created our own Agile Blanket Purchase Agreement for, I don't know if anyone's familiar with GSA Schedule 70, that's an IT schedule contract that IT vendors can get on. We're doing a lot of experimentation with micro purchasing. So for those of you that may or may not know, government has this rule that if it's under $3,500 and can be bought on a credit card, on a government credit card, then it's a micro purchase and essentially the FAR just doesn't apply, which is pretty cool. And we thought, well, you know what, $3,500, that can buy you some code. That can buy you a bug fix. That can buy you a small feature on an open source code set. What are we going to do about that? And so we built a platform that other government agencies and our clients and we internally now use to throw auctions up in sort of like an eBay style way where different vendors bid and then they get paid once they deliver the code, as long as it's under $3,500. And then part of our secret sauce at certainly in my team is we're very much into collaborating alongside COs. Oftentimes a government procurement model is such that the program office decides what they want, they throw it over to the contracting shop, they write something up, throw it back over. Maybe you get a contract at the end that's good, maybe you don't. What we are really into is making sure contracting officers are engaged with the procurement process from the very beginning. They're integrated into the program team. When we do the discovery sprints, contracting teams are always there. That's part of our secret sauce is we require them there so that everyone's on the same page about the thing that needs to be bought, so ultimately the solution you buy is what you want. And then I want to talk to you all a little bit about the Agile BPA. So that's a brand new Agile blanket purchase agreement we created off of Schedule 70. And we wanted to pave the way for better procurement practices. And as Allison mentioned, we do have a little bit of air cover. We are making some mistakes. And we wanted to be the proving ground, well, or not making mistakes in this case, for a new type of procurement. And so we put this procurement out there. We required open source code to be submitted in lieu of the traditional proposal. So we wanted a working piece of software, which was pretty revolutionary. Vendors were not super excited about it. Ultimately, I think we got over 200 pieces of code submitted, which is amazing. Of those, 17 vendors were selected. We were protested, I think, 8 times in 3 separate venues. All of the protests were dismissed with zero need for agency corrective action. So we were feeling pretty proud of ourselves about that. It's not often you get to do that. And so now we are doing modular contracting for different types of Agile services. And ultimately what that means is if an agency comes to us and they want a dashboard built or a front-end public-facing site, but they want to do it in an Agile way and they want sort of like the 18F procurement magic in there, but they ultimately understand that for the long run, the O&M is going to be done by a vendor. They come to us, and we are now open for business, taking buys off of the BPA. And the way we're doing it is we're actually putting those RFPs out on GitHub, so it's going to be all open. Vendors get to ask questions in the open on GitHub, which is also pretty new and different. And I think as of last time I checked, we had over 85 questions posted before the first buy from different vendors, and we answered all of them. A number of them did lead to us changing our documents, which was great. We're going to continue scaling our work, and we're also going to continue with micro purchasing. But I welcome any contract lawyer-related related questions when we get to the question segment. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Ms. Marissa Newhall.
Thank you so much to Robbie and to Michael for inviting me to be here today. This is exciting because, as I mentioned earlier, I think I'm the only person at DOE that has digital and strategy in my title, and so I like geeking out with other people who are thinking about this stuff, so this is fun. So I have been at the Department of Energy for just under 3 years, and I came to digital stuff from a journalism background. That's how I started my career. So I was very content focused, primarily producing multimedia content, but also writing and editing. And for me, the bridge was really starting to branch out. I did work at nonprofits as well. I was very interested in energy issues, as it happens. And I spent time at some very small organizations working on content strategy, and also when we needed a new website, figuring out how are we going to do that? How do we make decisions about user-centric design? How do we make sure we're getting the right vendors? How do we make sure that's all kind of coming back to what we need for our mission? So I did that for several years, and then I ended up here at the Department of Energy in the Public Affairs Office. So for me on this panel, I'm a bit of an anomaly. I am actually a person who is trying to implement within an agency a lot of these big ideas. And when we talk about digital services, I think it's really important, especially from an agency perspective, to point out that the culture of every agency is different and the mission of every agency is different. So the way that agencies are going to need to improve digital services will vary greatly from one agency to another, and the culture will also impact the effectiveness of any attempt you're making to improve those services. So at the Department of Energy, as most of you all know, for most of the agency's history, the program offices are, they're all kind of doing their own thing, and they have their own budgets. And so for a long time, there really were no centralized guidelines on if you need a website, how are you going to do that? So if you go back with me to the dark days of 2010, which wasn't really that long ago, every single program office at the agency was really doing its own thing, had its own websites because it needed to. It had mission critical reasons for that. And in the absence of guidance, there were dozens of standalone websites, all on different content management systems with different contracts for hosting and for content management and development. So obviously very wasteful, and just a poor experience for people who are coming to our websites looking for information. Just confusing, not a good service to the public. So in 2010, the director of public affairs at the time decided that this was a problem we really needed to fix. So they went and created a small team to investigate the problem, come up with a solution. In 2011, they launched the first version 1.0 of energy.gov, which was a change from the former domain, which was doe.gov, which I always like to point out because, again, thinking about user-centric design and services, DOE could be anything. It's very unclear, what does that mean? Energy.gov is very clear. This is a trusted source of information from a government agency. And so since then, we've iterated the site. We do practice agile development. So we are constantly deploying code, doing bug fixes, functionality improvements. The site is on Drupal, so it's open source. It's very cost effective to manage it, to scale it up. And after the site was launched in 2011, we began, as Robbie mentioned, the digital reform project to one by one migrate all of those disparate websites onto this new centralized open source platform. So as of today, we're about 98% done with that project, and we are really pleased with the response that we've gotten from offices. We are always fielding requests from people that actually want to build new websites on energy.gov, which is really great. Because ultimately, from an agency perspective, to keep these digital service improvements sustainable over time, we really do have to instill empowerment and ownership over them with the folks who are going to be here beyond changing administrations and things like that. So that is a big goal of mine, is to find more ways to really engage with the people who are actually using these tools and making it as effective as possible a tool for their stakeholders. So, you know, we're actually, I also like to mention that we were one of the first federal agencies to go 100% mobile responsive with our website. We did that in 2013, which, for those of you that don't know, that basically means that the content on the website is accessible regardless of what device you're using when you visit the website. So the browser, regardless of the size of your browser, the content will readjust. So instead of having to maintain a mobile site and a main site, you can access and use all of the content regardless of how you're using it. And that was in response to increased mobile usage of our website. So we do look at data and analytics. We use that to drive a lot of our decision making. So that was the digital reform project. You know, we do also, out of my shop, we manage the social media and digital content that the agency's been putting out, which is a different topic. It's more content, it's not tech, but in my mind, I do actually see that as another way we can offer a service to taxpayers. We're trying to use technology to connect the public with the scientists and the experts and the researchers that are using their taxpayer dollars to do amazing things and, you know, research groundbreaking technologies. So we do lots of live social media events. We're always looking for opportunities, you know, that are, you know, social media is pretty affordable for the most part. There's a lot we can do with a very small budget to really get people excited about the work that we're doing and to answer their questions and to make them feel like they're part of this process. It's great for increasing transparency. And that in itself, I do think, is another great service we can offer. So quickly, you know, I could go on, but I think there's some really important lessons we've learned through all of this, at least through my eyes. I think you can make big changes happen even if some culture change is necessary, but you do have to come back to creating project teams that have a fixed scope. So in my case, I only manage one project. You know, I'm not managing 10 digital service projects. If my scope crept too far, I probably couldn't be effective. Also, using data to make decisions is big. For us, that's great. We do have cover from management right from the top. Secretary Moniz is a data guy. When you go in to talk to him about anything, he wants to know if there's numbers to back it up. And that to me is amazing because it makes my job easier in a way. And also thinking users first. That is kind of a revolutionary concept, especially when it comes to website design. I think there's a tendency in the government to design websites based on how your org chart looks, thinking about it from the inside. And it's so important for us to think about the people on the outside, the people we need to reach, the people we need to educate, the people who are coming to us because we are a trusted source of information. So yeah, that's kind of a quick crash course there, but I'm looking forward to answering questions and hearing what you guys have to say.
Great. Thank you. And next we have Mr. Moza Dexia.
Well, thank you, Marissa. That was a lot of stuff that I can continue talking about, right? So I'll follow along with what Gabriel kind of pointed out of one of our main challenges being compliance, and let's just call it, you know, getting our ATO for our systems, right? So I came from the contractor space in the past with the intelligence community. Now just imagine how hard that is to get an ATO, right? So what we had tackled from a contractor's perspective was the same problems we are facing here, is how can we deliver value faster to our customer and have sustainability for those deliveries. And when I joined 18F, it just kind of opened up a new world for me where it was like, oh, yeah, I wasn't the only one doing it in a silo of an environment trying to prove something out. Now the government is trying to do it as a holistic approach to solve a lot of problems within the federal space. So when compliance comes into the picture, really what 18F has done is taken a layered approach on how to do that security and sustainability and deliver frequently, so we are not blocked by any kind of gates other than, major one being the ATO. So when we accelerate the ATO evidences that they need for that approval to happen, the DevOps world kind of unites with security. Now, I don't want to get into the whole framework of how DevOps is, implemented, but it is still, the idea is still a lean and agile methodology. It's just cooperation between developers and operations, right? So here, I want to bring up also the fact that look into FedRAMP. FedRAMP is a thing. It helps you get to compliance faster. Cloud.gov is our solution to reduce that security footprint even further, right? So you've got FedRAMP solutions for your infrastructure. Then on top of that, you've put in the application services that can be abstracted and maintained by that security boundary. And then we focus on our application where developers are now cooperating with operations with minimal effort. So Cloud.gov essentially created that abstraction where developers are now more focused on developing their product without disrupting our daily work with operations, right? And now I'm pretty sure we've all been there. Oh, operation needs help. Go get that engineer and get him in here. And he's spending hours troubleshooting something that he shouldn't be troubleshooting, right? And he can't touch the keyboard because he's not a privileged user, right? So that just ate into the cost right away in our contracts. What we've done is created such fluidity between developers working with the systems that operations now, honestly, one of my colleagues basically said it's dev, not ops, right? Because we're not really bothered anymore by you guys, so go develop. So I think that's what the unique innovation that the government has achieved, which is rare in the public sector anyways, is that cloud.gov proves that point that we can be modern, we can be innovative within the government, and culture change, that's the evidence we also propose is it works. It's not, we shouldn't be risk averse to this now. We have proven it out. A lot of agencies are still like, I don't know what this agile thing is. I don't know what lean is. I have 300 people on this contract. Does that mean they're gonna get fired and we come down to like 100 people? Maybe, I don't know. But that's a question mark that everybody has about all of that. So again, my experience is pretty broad, so I don't have a little narrow topic to talk about. I've worked since the dawn of internet, AOL days to present, and I've seen technology evolve, and I think we are ready to take on this new way of doing and absorbing technology in the community, in the government. I mean, the industry's already proven it. So that's all I have.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. At this time, we'd like to take questions either from the audience or also from online. If anyone who has a question, if you could either go to one of the mics on either side of the aisle, or I think we have handheld mics also. Yes, right down here.
My question is for Mr. Ramirez. When you're designing and building a new system, the federal government has a lot of compliance issues around how you manage federal records. What's the process you go through to make sure that your system's compliant in that area?
So mostly I work with cloud.gov compliance, and right now we're kind of at the FedRAMP low level, moving on to the moderate. So we actually haven't had to deal with the problem of having government records, essentially, yet. But I don't know, maybe y'all have a little more experience in that than I do.
Well, we will be venturing down that path, but I am not at liberty to talk about it right now. But I think we have a platform where if the question is about categorizing your system based on what security controls that have been identified, that's still a security task. It's just after you have categorized in the risk management model right now, we wait until the developers start developing the solution, and then we feed back into the system. I think what we've created is essentially a feedback system that is less time consuming, so you can make decisions quickly about your whatever compliant gaps you may have, right? Instead of waiting 6 months, 10 months later, and then sitting down with the security folks saying, well, you guys totally failed all of these controls, or there's major controls missing here that weren't identified. So I think it's more of a how you approach security now, instead of, I don't know if I answered that question clearly.
Thank you.
I would say that the digital services teams are still kind of nipping around the edges. We, at least of the systems that I know of that have been built, you know, we're not deep in the guts of, you know, OPM systems, things with like serious security issues around the data. When we got started, it was really kind of more of the low-hanging fruit, like the, you know, to be honest, the sort of easier things to deal with, like the FEC API. That's all public data. So that didn't bring in that whole other layer of issues to deal with. That said, when we came in as PIFs and then also at 18F, everybody receives training on what is PII, how do you deal with it, you know, how do you do proper records management? That's all required training, and everybody receives it. And there's always an awareness of, you know, going through, you know, asking the questions: is this data that we can safely deal with, or is it something that we need to put extra controls around? So, I guess, you know, to answer your question, we're maybe getting there, but not yet.
I can talk a little bit about how we dealt with also access controls. So I think when we get to government records, we're going to deal with it the same way, and that's through automation. Essentially, we believe that our system has to be continually compliant, and because of that, we've built in like automated tests to make sure that our access management is working, like not unit tests, but integration tests, to make sure that our access controls are working and like aren't allowing like unauthorized access. And every time we like update our system, we'll check, make sure it's working, and then update it, like automatically update the documentation as accordingly. So I think compliance takes a lot of time, and our path forward is going to be just more automation.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, I have a question for acquisition, and that is, when I worked at a previous agency, we dabbled in a little bit of crowdsourcing applications, and basically the lawyers would go nuts over that because there were issues with the unions and with privacy and with liability. And I was wondering if you have a model that solves some of those problems that can be distributed out to agencies, maybe circumvent a lot of that?
Sure. So I think the answer for everything is it depends. Sorry to just give that lawyer answer right away. But so I'll give an example of the micro purchase platform and what we did. So it is not a crowdsourced platform in the sense that the U.S. government, 18F, puts a posting up on the site that says, I need this feature added to this code set. I'm willing to pay up to $3,500. It's a reverse auction down to $1. Go. This is the acceptance criteria, this is the code, this is the automated testing, test-driven development, all that good stuff that we require. This is how, you know, you got to get paid. And so then vendors bid. In order to bid, they first have to have a sam.gov, or I'm sorry, they have to have a DUNS number and have an active registration in sam.gov. So that is our legal liability threshold to show that they can do business with the government. They don't have to, you know, be on a contract, be on Schedule 70, facility security clearance, like none of that. Just sam.gov registration, which in and of itself for a lot of coders who are just open source coders wanting to get in there and give their shot at government contracting, that in and of itself is a pretty large hurdle. It's not that easy to get a DUNS number, et cetera. But for those that have done it, it's been really terrific. And so they come in, they register on the site. We validate through the sam.gov API to make sure that they are valid, they haven't been disbarred or anything. And then they're able to bid when the auction closes. They have a period of time to deliver. Then they deliver via a pull request on GitHub. That is our only method of delivery unless stated otherwise. Then we review their code. And the great thing about 18F is we do have technical expertise, such as the ones you see at this table, who can review pieces of code for flaws, what have you. If we decide that it meets all the acceptance criteria, we pay them. And so in that sense, it is not crowdsourced. We are not receiving code for free from lots of people. We are paying for the code, but only from the one vendor who wins each auction. And so that is scalable. We have, the great thing about the micro purchase threshold is there just fundamentally are way fewer laws about that. Another interesting thing is there are some laws around challenges that I think if you host a challenge, like challenge.gov used to, you can award money quicker than following a traditional, you know, open procurement. But I don't have any experience with actual crowdsourcing of ideas.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have a question down here in front.
Are you finding some of the newer development models and techniques like the increased focus on logging in DevOps or our unit testing making dovetails with a lot of the compliance requirements?
Short answer, yeah, definitely. Just because part of the compliance is having that assurance that your system is working, and I think originally, like if you look at how compliance was handled, you essentially have to take, for example, a screenshot of the users and like show that this user was truly deleted, and that's not actually, that's compliant. That's not really secure though. So I think through the automated testing and integration testing, we can actually not only be compliant but at the same time secure. So I think it is safer and it's better.
Yeah, I'd also add to that we have layered our tools to tackle the different controls effectively, where, for example, static code inspection, dynamic code inspection, we have automated all of that at a delivery level, at not even at production, it's pre-production activity. So we identify all the flaws before it hits to, hit staging or whatever. And that generates enough analytics for us to create that. Again, I was talking about feedback. Your system now is truly a feedback system. You have a lot of data now to make critical decisions quickly. And that's where we talk about delivering value and sustainability, is we're building out automated tools where we don't need to have manpower wasted on people doing mundane activity, right? Like security engineers can now actually be an engineer versus, looking at Word documents. So.
Thank you.
If an agency is using social media for conducting agency's business processes, for example, then considering that social media as a digital record is created in the database, okay? So my question is really, well, first of all, are there any policies in relation to how far you're going to keep that social media record, and how far in time that you're going to go in terms of storing that record? If, for example, if it is needed in the future for any congressional inquiry or Freedom of Information Act, or any any requirement for retrieving that information, Do you have any policies? Do you have any guidelines?
So
whether GSA or?
I will say, for my experience with my team that manages social media, that yes, NARA does have guidelines for social media management and records keeping. I am by no means an expert on those guidelines, but there are members of my team who are, and we do comply with those guidelines. And, you know, we have in the past, there have been folks who have FOIA'd social media records, which, you know, we have work to provide. So the answer is yes. But other than the NARA guidelines, I don't know of others.
But have you implemented that? Obviously, are you from GSA?
No, I work here at the Department of Energy.
Yeah, right. Okay. Have you implemented that
Yes.
in DOE?
Yes,
Oh,
we
I see.
comply with those.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Do we have any?
In regards to energy.gov, for the Drupal platform, are there a method or plans to incorporate interactive multimedia? We have some great graphics, for example, an infographic, but within that, there's more to the story. And instead of having people bounce from page to page, is there a way to overlap or interleaf multiple multimedia, video, sound, etc.?
So there currently are ways. There's definitely the capability to embed content that's interactive into the website. We do that frequently in my team. I will also say we're in the process of planning a cosmetic and functional redesign of the website, which will be rolling out over the summer. So I'm not sure if we've met before, but I'd love to chat with you afterwards to hear more, and I can give you more information on how you can plug in and give us feedback on things you'd like to see in the next iteration. Thanks.
So let's see, I have a quick question. The discussion around treating compliance as code is really fascinating. Have you done any work to apply that on the privacy side of the house, sort of automated interpretation of PIAs and SORNs and that sort of thing for systems of record?
No, not yet.
Not
But
yet.
I mean, we're building it to be extensible. So yeah, if someone has the time to expand it, we'd love that.
It is open source.
Any other questions? Here in the front?
Oh yeah. The repository is at github.com/opencontrol. You can also find more information at compliance.cloud.gov, and that's actually the SSP that we're working on for cloud.gov. It's completely open source, and there's also documentation on how we generated it, and also the machine-readable SSP that kind of created the website.
Okay, you've kind of answered my question right there. I was going to ask which of the controls do lend themselves to automation, about what percentage of the entire catalog have you been able to address through scripting, JSON, YAML, and put into this electronic automated thing, so to the extent that a machine could automatically run it?
So I don't know if I have an exact number, but you'd be really surprised. There are controls that deal with essentially updating the policies like every 6 months, and we even have scripts that automate checking if the policies have been updated every 6 months, and will fail if you haven't actually updated them. So there's all types of magic you can do with code. It's up. I think I don't see why almost all of them couldn't be automated, to be honest.
Well, there's a bunch that you would probably need an attorney to do, but
Yeah.
I don't think we're ready to automate the attorneys.
The great thing about behavior-driven development, and also the way we are structured at 18F, but also with our partners, is making sure that attorneys and compliance staff are engaged from the very beginning, which is really great.
And actually, a lot of the testing that we do is developed in the Gherkin style format. So it's essentially almost like legal code, essentially, where it has given this, when this happened, then this happened. So we're trying to kind of bridge that gap, right, between actually moving the pieces in the machine and also having the legal code make sense together. So The process is still starting, but I think in the next couple months you'll see a lot more coming out.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this couldn't have been done if we didn't pursue open source way of developing. I mean, you will not get this kind of clarity and transparency when you're dealing with proprietary solutions. So the fact that we can interrogate a documentation store to determine policies up to date, things like that, we have to have interfaces that are available to other services. So that's another model that keeps us going, is we have a lot of open APIs and interactions that can happen without restriction. So
Thank you. And thanks, everyone. This concludes our session today. Thanks, everyone for attending, and let's give our panelists a round of applause.